Hey, Ask a Christian friends and family, it's Amy here, and I've got a guest for you today. I want to tell you a little bit about him. This gentleman, and he truly is a former magazine editor, retired college professor, current author. He's definitely writing things, husband, father, granddad, so he loves humanity. This man is a general pot stirrer, but not the bad kind. If the beans burn on the bottom, he lets that stuff stay, but he stirs the rest of the pot. And this man is also the reason I personally had to wake up at 7:30 for creative writing class. Please welcome my friend and teacher, Chris Blake. Chris, how are you this morning?
Doing well, Amy. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to start off with a couple getting to know you questions because, you're always like, who is talking to me? Why should I care about them? Mm-hmm. And I really love your storytelling ability. I'm wondering if you will regale us with a tale of either why there is a soft cast on your arm or... Oh, it's a splint. Okay. Or if you'll tell me a little bit about the last time you were involved in a roller or wheel sport, and maybe they're the same reason.
Yeah, I think I can merge the two, actually. Yeah, I was hiking outside of San Luis Obispo, where I live. I was hiking up Profumo Canyon, Magnolia Trail with my wife, Yolanda. This was during the pandemic here, and so we were getting out on our own and going up some single track and heading up to the ridge. And as we were coming down, three really hot bike riders came zooming downhill. I'm tempted to make up something so that I, somehow saved a life or went bungee.
Oh, yeah. Feel free.
But anyway, they kind of kicked up some gravel, kind of those ball bearing gravel pieces. So in one corner, Yolanda, we were talking about her upcoming birth anniversary, and I said, so what do you want to do? And she said, well, what are my options? And I turned around and whoo, my feet rolled up. Yeah, so I went down and braced myself on my wrist and ended up breaking my wrist. So there it is. There's wheels and my injury at the same time.
And I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, I hope it's healing up.
Yeah, it is.
I am so grateful. We've got a few viewers who just joined us. I want to welcome you guys. Also want to encourage you. If you haven't checked out this channel, there's a lot of good content on here. Interviews with interesting people like Chris, but really unlike Chris in many ways. But we thank you for joining us and want to let you know that we will have time for questions and answers every so often. So if you've got a question for Chris or for me, feel free to put it on Facebook or YouTube, and it'll pop up here for me as well, so I can pass that on to Mr. Blake, as I called him for several years. Thank you for that story. I want to get a little bit more of your background. I'm particularly interested, since this is Ask a Christian, on a little bit about your Christian walk. When you were young, what was your relationship with God like, and what informed your views of God and religion?
I grew up, I would attend church once in a while, church meaning a congregational Christian church. But primarily when I attended, I would sneak out and into the basement and play pool on a slanted table so that everything went into the side pocket there. So it wasn't real meaningful to me, I have to say.
Were you dragged along? Was it like the family went together and you just...
Yeah, we just went. Yeah, I just tagged along, kind of. And I guess I would say I was turned off to Christianity, especially the Bible, because of the 3 H's.
Tell them to me.
Yeah. Well, the first one is hell. The belief that this God would fry people forever and put the devil as the head chef in charge of the cooking, you know?
Right. Even worse than Gordon Ramsay.
Just, yeah, it's the worst lie ever told, and
Mm,
Christians still keep telling it.
mhm.
Um, and then second one was heaven. I really wasn't interested in what I heard about heaven. People say, "Oh, it'll be so great. I'll be able to slide down a giraffe's neck." But I thought, you're going to get saddle sore after a couple of 100 years of that.
Mhm.
And it just, the cumulus couches just didn't seem very attractive to me. I wasn't interested in that either.
Mm.
And then the third H is, of course, hypocrites.
Ooh, yeah.
So that turned me off as well. So three H's turned me off. I was intrigued and attracted to this Jesus character.
Mm.
But the Bible,
That is not.
no, I wasn't interested in any trafficking with that.
Hmm. Well, seeing that you've become a pastor in
Mm.
your ripe young age, something must have had to switch somewhere. Do you remember the first time that um, that some of this switched? Do you remember that when God got a hold of your heart for the first time, or just a really meaningful time?
Yeah, yeah. My experience is more like a sunrise than a lightning bolt. It took a lot of time for me. Um, I'll mention one noteworthy event. I was
Hmm.
dating a girl that I'm still dating. We've been
Yes.
married. Yeah, we've been
Oh.
married 43 years now, uh, which I probably shouldn't have said because it says something about Yolanda's age. And I can't say we got married at the age of 9 either because that'll
Mhm.
throw that out the window.
People
But
might start
anyway,
listening.
I was dating Yolanda and I just graduated from, well, I was about to graduate, I think, from Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, where I
Mm.
had played basketball point guard for 4 years. Um, and then after those four years, I decided to start going to school. So I was going to school and getting close, cramming my education into 6 years. Um, and Yolanda gave me this book called The Desire of Ages. And it's basically about the life of Jesus. And I was an English major. So I got open this book. It's a long book. And I looked at the table of contents and I went basically all the way to the end. I like to look at the end of things. Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. I like that.
Hey, that's one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
I love it.
So I looked and I saw this chapter, Amy, and it was Judas.
Mm.
And I thought, I think I'll read that one first.
Yeah.
So I was living in a water tower at the time here in San Luis Obispo, which is now a parking lot, unfortunately. But it was a water tower on the back of a house. And I started reading about this Judas, who's arguably the worst villain in history. You
Mm.
know, very few people name their children Judas
Very few.
anymore. And so I'm reading about him, and this chapter says at one point Judas actually loved Jesus and followed him and was working with him and for him, but got turned aside. Basically, love of money consumed him. And I thought when I was reading this chapter, wow, this guy's not that bad. I mean, even and I remember those two words reverberating in my soul.
Yeah.
Even I, because I was comparing myself to the worst villain in history, and
Mm.
this sense of soul need opened up right there for me.
Mm.
A need for some transcendence. And then Then I skipped a couple of chapters there, and I went to one. It looked like Gethsemane to me, and
Yeah.
came to understand it was Gethsemane, a garden
Mhm.
experience. And so I read about Jesus in the garden and where the real battle took place. I'd heard about Calvary, but I hadn't heard about this one.
Mhm.
And I started falling in love with God
Mm.
through this experience. And then I started reading the chapters, the Gospels, the books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And Matthew was really something. It was good. Mark didn't do a whole lot for me. Luke, though, laid me out.
Hmm.
Um, and John did as well. Luke and John are my two favorite books. And so I fell in love with God, and I'm still in love with God.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
think, when I think about where I want my friends, like the friends that I desire good lives for, the friends that I desire to be in heaven with and hang out with. And I'm not about the drafts either, by the way. That really appealed to me because I didn't care for the concept of heaven. It sounded super boring until Andrew Uyama, who was my boss here in Central California, said, "You know what heaven is? It's the people you love, including Jesus, when you get to know him. It's the people you love. It's food that's good for you. It's music that takes you to another realm,
Hmm.
and you don't have to say goodbye. And it's the best day on earth X, a million. It's all the research you want to do and just making it very real because like you, I might have grown up in a situation where people told me things that they thought I would think was fun, trying to help, and it just sounded very vastly unappealing."
Yeah. And even beyond that, we'll probably get into this a little more. Um, Heaven is really only freshman orientation.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, because we actually leave there, and it says there in Revelation 21, the 21st chapter, that we leave heaven and we come to this earth made new.
Mm.
All of life is cyclical. The seasons, each day, each year, and the same thing is true with this planet. That we leave this planet, we go to heaven, and we have our training wheels put on, basically,
Mm.
and then we come home to this real place. It's a real place, this earth, and it's actually one reason, Amy, that environmentalism should matter the most to followers of God, because this is our eternal home, and what we practice matters. It's not a disposable planet, really. That
Yeah.
you know.
I know people who think that once they get the point of the metaphor, then they can stop practicing it.
Mm,
As if just getting the point of Jesus, it's as if the knowledge would save you, as if it was a grand test. Do you know this? As if knowing was important. Knowing is important because it should lead us to a relationship, right?
that's right. And
I
even
love
beyond relationship to friendship.
Mm,
Um, Friendship is deeper than relationship. I can have a relationship with a turtle.
right, but it could be
But
very casual.
yeah, you can't really have friendship. At least I can't. Uh, so friendship with
Mm,
God is my ultimate aim. It's also my ultimate aim with Yolanda, my wife, with my children. I want to
mm,
be friends with them, and I believe that God wants us to be friends with God as well. And
mm.
Jesus says that. No longer do I call you servants, I call you friends.
Yeah, I love that verse. Hey, I want to take a minute and welcome you who just have joined us from looks like all over the earth. Um, but thank you so much. I just want to let you know that with us today is Chris Blake. And if you've got questions for Chris throughout this broadcast, you can pop them in the Facebook or YouTube comments section, and they will show up on my screen. So feel free to chime in with this discussion. We want it to be casual and fun, and we want you to be participants. Lisa Mitchell says, "I love that reminder that friendship is deeper than a relationship." Thank you. Um, I want to kind of make it clear where I'm going with this next line of questioning. Chris, you wrote a book that honestly I just bought because you were my professor and I thought you were cool, and your circle of influence, influenced me. If I hadn't known you, I would have never found it. And maybe I just wanted to suck up to you. I don't know, but I just thought, I like and respect this guy. I want to see what he has to say. And then it's turned into one of my favorite Christian books. And I don't say that like a genre of Christian books. I say that as a person who really, really values Christ-centeredness and exploratory learning. I did see a lot of Christ in that book, and I'm grateful for it. So those of you who are watching who may not be from a Christian background, I'm going to put the link to this book because it's called Searching for a God to Love. And I feel like it was just well titled. I appreciated the title before and after reading it, both as good marketing and as a summary of what I found in that book. So the next kind of series of questions, our main part of this interview today, is going to be from the first 3 chapters and then whatever Chris wants to throw in, because those were chapters that when I was trying to find foundations for my own beliefs, my own faith, helped me work through some things that honestly, and Chris will tell you, things that honestly don't have answers on this earth sometimes, but we do have a framework to grapple with them. So anyway, all that to say, I want to get into some of the things that we can't agree with friends who might be skeptical, either agnostic or even in the church. Like, I feel like I'm a skeptical believer because some things don't hit me right and I have to parse and ponder. But Chris Blake, what do you think? What do you think are some of the main things that we can agree with our agnostic and skeptical friends and brothers?
Yeah. I think we're all agnostics to some degree. We don't know about this God. And it says on the back of my book here, Chris Blake loves questions and those who ask them. That is true. I think asking is a good thing. I also think it's good to keep asking toward seeking for truth and honesty. And if we're not really committed to honesty, then our spiritual compass will just be continually spinning. There's no true north, unless it actually makes sense. Then we don't have anything that's stable and fixed that we can use as a basis. Go ahead and worship a bottle of mayonnaise then if you want. But I find that a lot of agnostics and atheists are committed to truth. What I also find is that we agree on the concept of mystery. I appreciate the mystery of life and the mystery of God. And I get very impatient when I encounter people who have God all prepackaged tightly, close enough so they can slip God into their pocket, and carry God around with them. And the book is about that. It's written for what I call believing unbelievers, that even believers should find all sorts of things they don't believe. I don't think doubt is an enemy. We should doubt all sorts of things. A greater enemy, frankly, is worry. Worry is more of an enemy than doubt. But mystery is not something that we don't know anything about. A mystery is something that we don't know everything about. That's an important distinction, because there are some things we can know, and of course, just getting into the ontological aspect of what does it mean to know anybody or anything is
Mhm.
could take us for hours, Amy. But I'm going to go to one of the great philosophers of our time, Forrest Gump.
Yeah, I love him.
Yeah, who said, "I may not be a smart man, but I know what love is." Um, Now, how much of love can we know? How can we quantify? I remember hearing somebody say, I don't believe in God because anything I can't touch or smell or taste, I don't believe in. There
Hmm.
was a woman who was drinking a Diet Coke, and I was at the table next to her, and I heard her say that, and I was thinking of just barging in the conversation. Fortunately, I did not, and saying, do you believe in a calorie? Do you believe in calories? You ever tasted a calorie? Smelled it? It's a measurement, but how do we measure this being called God? And God, of course, is just a symbol. As I'm a professor of English and communications, and words are just symbols.
Mhm.
They're not the actual thing. And unfortunately, that symbol brings up all sorts of horrific images and memories for some people. So find
Mhm.
something that works for you to explain this being beyond. Anselm said that uh, which we can't conceive of anything greater.
Mhm.
So what I think where we can agree. Um, Let me go to a parable Jesus told, because I always like to use Jesus stories. And in Matthew 21, he tells this parable. It's a parable of two sons.
Mm.
And the father goes to both of the sons and says to them, "Come work with me out in the field." So the first son says, "No, Dad, I'm not going to do it. Forget it." But
Mhm.
he later says, "Oh, okay, I'll do it." And he goes out. He doesn't even say it, actually. He just goes out and works in the field for his father. And the
Mhm.
second son says, "Yes, I will. I'll do it," but doesn't do it. And so Jesus is talking to, his audience, scribes and Pharisees and lawyers and very learned people. And he says, "Which one did the will of the Father?" And they say, "The one who actually did what Jesus said." And he said, "Yep." And that's why, and then he goes in all these people, that's why the sinners, the prostitutes, the lepers, all these people will enter the kingdom of heaven before you, because they're actually doing what God wants.
Yeah.
And I view that parable as being indicative of today. There are some people that do not call themselves Christians or followers of God who live godly lives.
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable label for many people for lots of
Yeah,
different reasons, and
yeah.
I definitely sympathize with them, but you're saying
And,
that
yeah,
they're
and there are people who call themselves Christians who are
sure.
not living godly lives.
Right. I that's one of those 3 H's. I'm with you. I'd love to root them out, except I might not be there myself from time to time. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
don't do that.
Yeah.
So so uh, that helps me to understand. I guess I'm always looking forward, Amy, to the new earth. I I think people are weary and wary of constantly talking about origins.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't, when I'm driving down the street, I don't stare fixedly into the rearview mirror. You know, I'm
Mhm.
looking, I'm looking ahead through the windshield. I have an aim, and my aim is the new earth, and I want to be a new earth person. And I kind of tend to look at people, who would I like to live next to forever? Now, obviously, um, the person we want to live next to forever is going to be somebody who's going to follow God's directives, this all-knowing being. Maybe it's not obvious, but it is to me, because otherwise we have hell, cropping up again, and we can't afford that. And we want people who are kind, people who are compassionate, people who are accepting. Actually, I use the acronym which describes grace. We need gracious people, graceful people. But this acronym encapsulates grace to me. It's FAST: forgiving, accepting, sharing, and trusting. And those are the people that I want to live next to forever. They live graciously because they have accepted the grace of God. And they're going to make good neighbors forever. And I like those kind of people.
I want to add one more F in there. It's just personal, but I would like funny. I want funny neighbors too. So I'm going to fast. I have a fast neighbor.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
That's just me.
Some people are unintentionally funny.
Yeah.
Still funny.
Right. Some of the other things that you mentioned in your book that I really resonated with, especially as kind of a 15-year-old who kind of was just starting to wonder about, like, why us? Why this earth? If there was a God, if he did send Jesus, why this earth? Because you talk about having ideas about our insignificance in this universe. And I really like that. Another thing we touched on is that God has been made a dirty word. And it is difficult to associate yourself, with so much hypocrisy and honestly, so much laziness. Sometimes you just see, it's not that somebody's a bad person in the church. You're just like, they're not a go-getter. Any number of things gets tied to the church label because we're, as Christians, we're supposed to be ambassadors. And so we've given God a bad name through our poor PR move. But you talk about something that I'd love for you to tell a story on is how agnosticism, how all of this can actually be limiting God by saying, oh, why us? Why would he ever want to talk to or come down and hang out with us? Why would earth be even on God's radar? Could you talk a little bit, tell the illustration of the young man interviewing for a job?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, this is part of the first chapter in the book is called "Excuse Me, You're Stepping on My God." And I go through 3 steps in how we can step on God. And the first one revolves around the story that you're talking about, Amy. A young man's interviewing for a position with the CEO directly, and he knows that this is an important interview. So the CEO says, I look forward to communicating with you if you get the position here. And the young man says, oh, I know you couldn't, you're too far above me. You couldn't communicate with me. I understand that there's no way that you can communicate with me. And the CEO says, shouldn't that be my prerogative? And he says, no. You're way too much, too exalted to communicate with me. And so the CEO says, thanks, but no thanks. You're not going to get the job. And then she sends him to the door. We have mistaken ideas about CEOs, first of all. Sometimes we think they are automatically a certain sex or gender. Also, same thing with God, by the way. I don't believe God has genitalia and chromosomes. So also God is not an it. So it's very difficult to categorize God. But to shut off any way for God to communicate with us is to step on God. If God wants to communicate with us, we should allow it. And recognizing that we're like, some people would say, you can't communicate with ants very well.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is we are not God. As a priest in the film Rudy said, I've learned two things in religion. One is that there is a God, and the other one is I am not God. So to shut things down for God is really to step on God and
Mm-hmm.
denying God's ability or desire to communicate with us is really a very narrow-minded view. And unfortunately, even atheists and agnostics take that. The second step is I talk about walking on the beach here at Pismo Beach
Mm-hmm.
and running actually along the beach. And I saw a guide with a metal detector. And I love to run along that beach, and all the different sights and smells, the pelicans and the gulls and the lifting fog and the hills. But he didn't see any of it. And the case is, the second step is we become too busy and bothered that we do not discern that God is already here. And I put in the book, God is nowhere can also be God is now here.
Oh, yeah.
Both spelled the same way. It's just how you perceive it. And to take an approach scientifically, which is called the God of the gaps, which means that if you can't explain something, then God is not involved in it, is a very, again, a very narrowing view. And it steps on God. Just because you can explain something scientifically doesn't mean God is not involved. As one scientist said when he made a discovery, he said, "Oh, so that's how God did it."
Yeah.
I like that very much. And of course, Sir Isaac Newton says, in the absence of any other proof, the human thumb alone would convince me of God's existence.
That's pretty cool.
He was a pretty bright guy. And the last one is reducing God to a prepackaged agenda until everyone is so turned off to religion and to God that nobody's even looking anymore.
Yeah, I like that both-sided approach because you can step on God all around. It doesn't have to be people outside of religion stepping on God, and it definitely doesn't have to be people just inside religion. It's just all of us fall on either side of the ditch.
Yeah. I have Muslim friends, by the way, and I learned this quite a while ago, that if I introduce myself as a Christian and they're not really much interested in trafficking with me and interacting with me. But if I said I'm a follower of Jesus, they're a little more interested. And from attending a mosque, I found out that Muslims are looking forward to the second coming of Jesus.
Absolutely.
That was a stunner for me.
Yeah.
They view Jesus differently than I do, but they see him as a someone who's coming back to take people to paradise. And also, if I said I'm a person of the book, that's way up.
Yeah, we have some Muslim friends watching the show. We have some, I see my pantheist friend on every so often asking questions. So I appreciate those different perspectives. And if you guys happen to come across this interview, happen to watch it, please send your feedback. Both Chris and I would love to hear from you and what you think about God and where you see agreement and overlap, particularly. That's fun for us. So some people know, but I work part-time as a Bible worker for our local church here. And one of the things that has, I think, closed down opportunities, and it's probably my approach. I always think, man, I could have approached that better. But a lot of times people ask me, do you not think I'm a good person? Do you not think that if there is, a weight of judgment, that it will be cast away from me, that I'll make it? Part of your book talks about what it means to be a good person. And I want to know if somebody's wrestling with that, and somebody would ask you that, Chris Blake, am I not good enough on my own that God would see, look, there's a decent human going about their life filled with love, just like we're talking about, pursuing truth. Yeah, am I a good person? Wouldn't I make it?
Yeah. Well, we got to define terms always, and what do we mean by good or good enough? Making it, I guess, would be into making it to the new
Into
earth.
whatever paradise.
Yeah, the new earth would be my end. Yeah. So the question is, to ask more questions, of course, and one of them is, on this new earth, in this new community, are we going to be trustworthy and teachable? Those are the two T's. We have to be trustworthy. We have to be teachable. Teachable, in my view, comes about when we don't live with an incredible sense of entitlement, which a lot of people do, undeserved. And to be teachable, and this goes back to my trust, and I don't really use the word faith very much because it's got too much baggage. I use the word trust. So my trust in God and my love for God. I believe in righteousness by love even more than righteousness by faith. So
what does that mean?
It means that love is the supreme value. It's what Jesus taught, and Paul and John and Peter and James, they all taught that the highest human value, human element, human aim is love, and that God is love. So righteousness means right doing. So if you're judging, am I good enough? The question is, are you loving enough? Okay. And so when it comes to being teachable, and I tell this in the book, Amy, that when I'm visiting somebody else's house, very often I'm on my best behavior, sort of, I don't put
for you
on the table kind of thing, I'm more careful about how I'm acting. If I'm entitled to it, I'll let it fly somehow, different ways. I'll get things dirty, But I think on the new earth, what helps us to be teachable is the understanding that we're all guests. We're all guests in this universe. And that it's called humble assurance. Those two go together. That this humble assurance, meaning we're all guests, and we're guests because of Jesus, that enables me to grow and to live in godly ways, in loving ways forever, because I remain teachable, because I'm not entitled, I'm not arrogant. I'm just, I'm not closed off. The hardest people to be around are people who are just too arrogant to listen to anybody else, including God. So,
right.
So teachable, the sacrifice of Jesus makes me teachable. Accepting that means accepting grace, and that means I live out that grace, which of course means forgiving, accepting, sharing, trusting, and apparently being funny. Yeah, that's a big one. But the second one is trustworthy, and the trustworthy is the indwelling Spirit of God. that it's not so much a question of my trusting God. Can God trust us? Can my community trust me forever?
Mm-hmm.
Not to lie, not to cheat, forever.
Not to be up
Not
to
to
any
do it.
shenanigans.
You
Yeah.
know, that's saying a lot.
I
And I
don't
don't believe
necessarily trust
we
myself.
receive. Yeah, I don't think
Um,
we get spiritual lobotomies when we go to the new earth. I think we are ourselves, and we will be able to recognize ourselves, because otherwise, if we're totally changed, then what's all this about now? Who am I if I'm just
right.
a harmonic convergence of atoms? Um,
Hmm.
so I think we will be different, and we will appreciate differences. And one mark of being a new earth person is that we say, I love you and I like you because you're different, which a lot of churches could really use that
Yeah.
approach. I love you because you're different. We need you.
Mhm.
And that uniformity is the enemy of unity. So, so those two, am I good enough then for that? I have to trust God on that. And, um,
It would take a
that's,
lot of swagger to be able to say yes for me. It would take a
yeah.
lot of swagger.
Yeah, I see humble people, that humble assurance. I like those two.
Mm.
You know that you are a child of God. There's that assurance there, and you're made in the image of God, and that humility enables us to be teachable and trustworthy forever.
Yeah. You talk about in the book, um, you talk about humanity not being able to see the true state of themselves.
Yeah,
You told a little story about being on an airplane um, that gave me a chuckle. And as we all know, I value funny. Would you mind telling that story and how that plays into what we're talking about?
sure. I
Oh,
will.
and the Manson quote.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
That was
yeah,
a creepy one.
yeah. Yeah, and that's a strange segue to do Funny and Manson together.
Yeah, sorry. I just dropped that one real heavy.
Well, this one involves my wife Yolanda. We were flying from Baltimore to Dallas. We got on the plane, and as we were there were some difficulties on the plane. We actually didn't even. I don't think we got on the tarmac exactly. I'm not sure we got it away from the pad there, and we sat there for a long time. While we were sitting there, a guy in front of us fell asleep and started snoring. We could hear him, and um, so then the pilot got on. He said, "Sorry, we've got some mechanical difficulties. We're going to have to deplane, and you need to get off the plane now." So everybody got up, and there was some grumbling and some cursing and whatever, and people are grabbing bags and standing in the aisle and getting ready to get off. And it's at that moment that this guy woke up, and he looked around. He stood up, and he's all bleary-eyed and blinking, as Yolanda says, blinking like a newborn baby, and she started laughing because he was fake yawning and looking around because he looked out the window. He could not tell if he was in Baltimore or if we had landed in Dallas and he had slept the whole time, because
Yeah.
all airports look the same.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Pretty
So,
cementy out there.
so Yolanda's just, she has this silent shaking laugh that I love. That she's just for probably 2 full minutes just laughing at this guy. And he's looking around and trying to make sense of stuff. And then he figures it out, and utters a curse word and grabs his bag, and he gets out in Baltimore. But that's indicative, and of course the book is full of stories, as you know. That's indicative of the story of our lives. Some of us don't know if we are, it's hard for me to say, I'm equating Dallas to paradise, but I will. We've landed at the end of our destination, or if we haven't. We're looking around, we can't tell, am I saved or am I not saved? And I have my favorite verses in the Bible are in Luke chapter 10, where a lawyer puts Jesus to the test and says, how do I inherit eternal life? Now, lawyers are savvy. And I love what Jesus does, because he just asks a question in response. He says, he's got answers, but he asks questions, and he says, what do you think? How do you read it in the law? And so he meets the lawyer where he is, which is what God does with each of us. That's the incarnational principle. That's Jesus meeting us where we are. Wherever we are, God meets us here. And so the lawyer says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus answers, you've answered correctly. Do this, meaning go beyond just the words. Actually live this.
Live it. Yeah.
Actually do it, and you will live. And I love that, because he doesn't just say live eternally. He means live now as well. You'll be alive now. Too many of us go through a near-life experience, not just a near-death one. Not being fully alive, plugged into God, experiencing God and experiencing love and life in full ways every day. Albert Einstein said there are two ways to approach life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle.
Yeah, I like
Back
that.
to your Charles Manson quote.
Oh, yeah.
Charles Manson.
On the other side.
Yeah, mass murderer. And he's being tried by a jury. And he stands up and seethes to the jury after they have convicted him. You have no right to try me. I did what I thought was right. Well, the truth is, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. And it's hard to say that, but we're held to higher standards. The standard, and it's tricky. The closer we get to truth, the closer we get to paradox. So it is true that in one sense, the highest standard we can have is integrity. In another sense, we even have higher standards than that. And of course, paradox means, you must serve to lead. You must be last to be first. You must die to live, die to self to be truly alive. So life is complicated, and it's also the case that life is simple at its root.
I love that story because, oh, sorry, yeah. I love that story because, and you talked about it early with your kind of God experience. The point where we take a look at our lives from God's perfection perspective, it could be terrifying when you see yourself without a filter. And that scares people and makes them cling to the I'm good enough, because many of us are really great relative to the others. And then you run into a quote like this where you think, well, that guy thought he was just fine too. And you can say, sure, that's a mental illness. That was a psychopath. But like, it's not one or the other. There really is a spectrum. People talk about there being a spectrum of these um, ideas and behaviors. And sure, that person is apparently broken to everybody. But when I lay my head down at night, I don't want to be so sure that there's not a little bit of that in me. I mean, that's just too much ego and too much swagger. So
Yeah.
thank you for showing us, kind of that end of it where if you're asking these questions, you're definitely on the way to salvation, no matter what your label says. And if you stand assuredly believing that you're good enough, that's probably the more dangerous place to be.
Yeah. And just, even beyond aiming towards salvation, I think it's helpful to aim toward being truly alive and truly living out God's love.
Mm. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize it, and I didn't. But the more I've studied what Jesus' words are when he says, abundant life or eternal life, there are different words there. I didn't know. And it is more about, it's not as much about the length of time
No.
as it is about the fullness of the life you have. I didn't realize that until, far into adulthood. So sometimes when he's offering eternal life, he doesn't mean another realm. He means right
No.
now.
That's right. Yeah. And that's the difference between everlasting and eternal. Everlasting is about duration, but if you ask somebody, I know somebody who's 100 years old, if I say to him, you want to live another 50 years, he's going to say no. No thanks.
No, probably
Yeah.
not.
But eternal life is about quality of life. And that's why this quality of life can begin now. That's the wonder of it. Eternal life begins now, now, on this knife edge of the present, and being,
Yeah.
in touch with the master of the universe.
Yeah, I want to be there. I mean, that is not a Christian idea at all. I mean, it is, but it's not an exclusively Christian idea. If you want to be in touch with the master of the universe, yeah, we're in the same boat, brother, sister. As I was afraid would happen, we are running out of time, at least the construct of it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you what you want to talk about, because there's, I have like a list of 5 or 6 other questions, but let me give you a couple options and see if you want to pick them or do your own thing. I want to talk about how religions at least have superficial similarities and maybe down into the mid layers, encouraging each other to love, forgive, some of these things that we've talked about, these principles of living. But if somebody's considering Christianity, why Christianity? Another side topic would be, why the Bible? Why is the Bible part of this revealing of God? And then other stuff I want to know is about you and challenges to your faith and how Christianity has been a benefit to you and a challenge. So either some personal stuff or Christianity and the Bible. Do you like any of those, or you want to pick your own adventure?
Yeah, I'll pick it a little bit here. Yeah, a lot of ways to go. I do believe that all truth is God's truth.
Mm-hmm.
That we can find truth all over, in an ear of corn or an escalator or the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
There's truth.
Mm-hmm.
And we can learn from one another, and that humble assurance enables us to be open and to learn. And that's a good thing to keep remembering.
Yeah, I appreciate
I do think that some people said, and Emerson, for example, Ralph Waldo, the original Where's Waldo, said he could not believe that God could be entombed in the Bible, in any book. And I agree that God is not entombed in a book. It's also the case, once again, the paradox, that the important things are written down in our lives. If you have a contract, you have it written down. And the same thing is true with this Bible. And the Bible is not a book, it's a library of books, you know. And so if we were still in an oral tradition, things would get lost. And today you would have somebody, you know, Janice would say, well, God told me this. And Marcus would say, well, God told me that. How would you check it out? And that's one reason I believe God has some things written down, so that we can go to it and check it out for ourselves. But as we check it out, a lot of people find discrepancies in the Bible. And those discrepancies, and I'm going to pause here just a moment, because that book took me 10 years to write, Amy. And I really, you know, we're just skimming across the surface on a lot of this stuff. Yeah. But I would encourage people to look at the book and see what you think yourself, and whether it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, toss it out. But if it makes sense, consider some of the concepts in it. There are inconsistencies in the Bible, and there should be. The Bible is not written for any just one type of person. If you can imagine a father who is writing to his impulsive child, he will write, be patient. But if he's writing to another child who is stuck in neutral, he will say, you know, get going. Is this father inconsistent? You know, writing to different audiences. There are different people who need different things. And you will find, there's an experiment I do in my classes. I don't know if you went through it, where I had somebody come in and do things. We wrote down on the board what they were wearing and what they said and all that kind of thing. There are inconsistencies because that's the way life is. Life is inconsistent, and eyewitnesses can be inconsistent. But the Bible is also trustworthy. I wrote this down. The Iliad is the best preserved book in antiquity. There are 643 extant copies, 643 of the Iliad. The New Testament has 24,633 manuscripts in existence. William Shakespeare texts contain at least 10 times as many disputed readings as are in what we call the New Testament, which is different from the original Testament.
Yeah, but nobody argues if Shakespeare existed. It's a pretty, like, we're pretty okay with that.
Yeah.
Why do we up our scrutiny for a religious historical text?
And of course, we could even argue if we're existing right now, you know, take the Matrix approach to life, right? Are we just part of a dream?
Yeah, or certain religions that this is all an illusion.
Yeah, that's right.
In a way.
Let me also point something else out. In the Bible, you have a lot of horrific pictures, especially in the original Testament. You know, there are ethnic cleanses, there are murders, there are rapes. It is not written for children, no matter how much we sanitize it. And it's also the case that if you look at a medical book and you see these horrific pictures of diseases, they illustrate a powerful need for healing. They don't talk about what the physician is like. So most of it is description, not prescription. Don't go do likewise. And throughout this original Testament, this took me a while to figure out, you've got these discrepancies taking place there as well. In 1 Chronicles chapter 10, it says, King Saul fell on his sword and died.
Mm-hmm.
And then 9 verses later, it says, Saul died because of his disobedience. Therefore, the Lord slew him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, which is it? Did God kill him or did Saul kill himself?
Well, like many things in life, we put it either or when it should be a both and.
Yeah, I don't even think God killed him. Yeah, I would say Saul killed himself. But in the original Testament, it's either, yeah, it's this binary of either God's in charge of everything or not.
Hmm.
So God's in charge of the glory and the gore. And then,
Two
when
G's.
Jesus comes, and I'm always going to come back to this. Jesus comes, Jesus is the clearest picture of what God is like. We have an advantage over anybody else who lived before Jesus. Anybody. Doesn't matter. This is what God is like. You want to take on God. You don't want to attack God. Attack Jesus. And through the life of Jesus, read the books of Luke and John. Through the life of Jesus, you see what God is like. That God is involved with healing. That God is a God of recovery. God does not bring on the disease. God heals and recovers these diseases. And I take an entire chapter on why there is suffering. How do you relate to that? It's called theodicy. Reconciling evil with God. That's an important chapter. If we can not hate God because of the existence of suffering, but understand that freedom is sacred to God, that God will never take away our freedom. That is a kind of a God that I can love. That matters to me, looking at that. So the Bible is a story. It's a story. If you look at it as a narrative and not just a rule book, don't pull it apart. Look at it in context. That's helpful.
Yeah, it has been for me. Well, we are at the hour mark, and so I am sure we will want to give people a break and then come back after the bell rings for second class. Maybe we can hook up and do a part 2 on some other concepts another time. But thank you so much, Chris Blake, for being here with us. And
Pleasure.
Your book, Searching for a God to Love, has been influential in my life, and I know it will be in whoever comes across this as well. I'll make sure that it's posted below the video so you guys can check it out. I'm going to end the live broadcast now, and I just want to let you guys know that I will be likely on vacation next week, so you'll probably get a Q and Amy session, but probably not an interview. So I'll be seeing you next week. And if you have anyone that you know that this interview, that this discussion could be a blessing to, we ask that you would share it, because we think there's good stuff here worth talking about. Thanks again, Chris Blake, and see you guys next time on Ask a Christian.